The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was sharp. Maya's eyes traveled from his face to the wig on the floor, then to the $10 bill still sitting in the cup holder, the money she had given him for coffee. Her expression shifted from shock to confusion, and finally to a deep, burning anger. "You followed me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You wore a costume to spy on me? You lied to me all afternoon? Why? Did you think I was doing something wrong? Did you think I was stealing from you? Is that what this is?" "No," Arthur said, reaching out a hand, but she pulled away. "No, Maya, it wasn't like that. I felt you slipping away. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. I thought if I was someone else, someone who didn't have the money or the name, you might actually tell me what was wrong." Maya let out a harsh, dry laugh. Tears were starting to track through the dust on her cheeks. "To trick me into opening up to a stranger? Do you have any idea how cruel that is? I told that driver things I've been holding in for years because I thought he was just a kind old man who lived a hard life. I felt sorry for him. I gave him my last $10 because I thought he needed it more than I did." "And you were right," Arthur said, his voice breaking. "I did need it more than you. I needed to hear every word you said. I needed to know that I was failing you. I've spent 20 years trying to make sure you never had to suffer like I did. But I didn't realize I was making you suffer in a completely different way." "You don't get to do this," Maya said, her hand on the door handle. "You don't get to hear my heart and then just say sorry because you wore a mask. That's not how it works, Dad. You wanted to know who I am? Now you know. I'm a person who works at a soup kitchen because it's the only place that feels real. I'm a person who keeps a dirty old bear because it's the only thing left of the father I used to have." She pushed the door open and stepped out into the gravel driveway. The mansion loomed behind her, its windows reflecting the dying light like cold, blind eyes. Arthur scrambled out of the driver's side. "Maya, wait, please." She didn't stop. Arthur caught up to her near the fountain. He grabbed her arm, not hard, but enough to make her turn. "I heard what you said about the I Spy game," Arthur said, his chest heaving. "I remember the storm, Maya. I remember the candle. I remember how your hand felt in mine. I haven't forgotten that, man. I got lost. I thought that by building all of this, I was keeping that candle lit for you forever. I didn't realize I was blocking out the light." Maya looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For the first time in years, the sterling mask was gone from him, too. He wasn't the CEO. He was just a man standing in a cheap ruined jacket, crying in his own driveway. "You said you'd give it all back," Arthur whispered. "The money, the house, the name. You said you'd give it all back just to have your friend again." Maya wiped her nose with her sleeve, her anger softening into a raw, vulnerable sorrow. "I meant it." Arthur took a long look at the house, then back at his daughter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the device that had been the third member of their family for as long as she could remember. He looked at the screen, which was lit up with urgent emails and emergency notifications from his board of directors. Without a word, he walked over to the edge of the fountain and dropped the phone into the water. It sank to the bottom with a small splash, its light flickering for a second before going dark. Maya stared at the water, then at him. "What are you doing?" "That's your entire life," no, Arthur said, stepping closer to her. "That was my job. You are my life. And I've been late for work for a very long time." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out the $10 bill she had given him. He held it out to her. "I can't take this, Maya, but I'd like to earn it. The man at the center said you need help mopping the floors on Saturdays. He said you stay until the job is done." Maya looked at the bill, then up at Arthur. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It was quiet, like the moment after a fever breaks. "You'd hate it," she said, a tiny, watery smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "It smells like old dishwater and floor wax. And the mops are heavy. I'm stronger than I look," Arthur said. "And I have a very good teacher." Maya reached out and took the $10. She didn't put it in her bag. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Arthur's waist. Burying her face in the scratchy, cheap fabric of the driver's jacket, Arthur held her, his chin resting on the top of her head. He didn't think about the shipping routes. He didn't think about the stock prices. He just felt the rhythm of his daughter's breathing and the warmth of a hug that was 20 years in the making. "I'm sorry it took a costume for me to see you," he whispered into her. "Hair. I'm just glad." "You're looking now," she replied, as the stars began to poke through the purple sky. The millionaire and his daughter walked toward the house. They didn't go in through the grand front entrance. They walked around to the side, talking about the people at the center, the tattered teddy bear, and what they were going to have for dinner together. With the phones turned off, Arthur Sterling still had his millions, but as he sat in the kitchen that night, listening to Maya laugh for the first time in years, he knew he was finally, truly rich. The disguise was gone, the wall was down, and for the first time since the lights went out in that storm a decade ago, the house finally felt like a home. The following morning, the Sterling mansion felt different. Usually, the house woke up to the sound of hurried footsteps, the buzzing of intercoms, and the sharp clicking of dress shoes on marble. But today, Arthur had given the staff the morning off. He wanted the house to be quiet. He wanted to see if he could handle the simple task of making breakfast for his daughter without a personal chef or a fleet of assistants. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the high-end stove as if it were a complex piece of alien technology. He realized with a pang of embarrassment that he didn't even know where the frying pans were kept. He had lived in this house for 5 years, but he had never truly lived in it. He had treated it like a hotel where the bill was always paid. But the guest was never home. The pans are in the drawer to the left of the sink. "Dad," a voice said from the doorway. Arthur turned to see Maya. She was wearing a baggy sweatshirt and had her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like a normal teenager, not the polished heiress the media liked to photograph. She was leaning against the doorframe, watching him with an amused expression. "I knew that," Arthur joked, though his clumsy searching gave him away. "I was just testing the acoustics of the kitchen." Maya laughed, and the sound filled the room in a way that felt more expensive than any of the art hanging on the walls. "Sure you were. Move over. If we wait for you to figure out the stove, we'll be eating lunch at midnight." The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble floors of the Sterling estate. For Arthur, the silence of the house was more deafening than the roar of the stock market floor. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, a glass of lukewarm water in his hand, watching the automated sprinklers dance across a lawn that was perfectly manicured but never played upon. He was 62 years old, and by every metric the world cared about, he had one. He owned a shipping empire that touched 3 continents. He owned properties he hadn't visited in a decade. But as he looked at the framed photograph on his mahogany desk, a photo of a much younger, dust-covered version of himself holding a small, wide-eyed girl named Maya, he felt a hollow ache that no amount of profit could fill. Maya was 19 now. She lived in the west wing of this very house, yet Arthur felt like she was living on a different planet. Lately, their interactions had become a series of brief, functional exchanges. "Good morning. I need the car for 2 o'clock, and the tuition has been paid." It felt like he was a bank teller, and she was a preferred customer. He remembered the little girl who used to sit on his lap and pull at his tie, demanding he tell her stories about the sea. Now, she was a young woman who walked past him with her eyes glued to a phone, her face a mask of polite indifference. Arthur took a sip of his water, his brow furrowed. A dark thought had been taking root in his mind over the last few months. It was a poisonous thought, one born of his own insecurities. Does she only stay because of the wealth? If I lost it all tomorrow, would she even know who I am? He hated himself for thinking it, but the evidence seemed to be everywhere. Every time he tried to plan a dinner, she had a thing to attend. Every time he tried to ask about her life, she gave him a summary that sounded like a press release. He had provided her with everything: the best private schools, wardrobe that cost more than some people's homes, and a future that was paved in gold. But in doing so, he feared he had accidentally built a golden cage that kept her heart away from him. He heard the soft thud of footsteps in the hallway. He knew that pace. It was Maya. He stepped out of his study just as she was passing by. She was dressed simply jeans and a plain white t-shirt, but even in simple clothes, she carried the air of someone who had never known a day of true want. "Maya," he called out, his voice slightly gravelly from disuse. She stopped and turned, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Oh, hey. I didn't think you were up yet." "I'm always up," Arthur said, trying to offer a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. "I saw on the digital calendar that you've requested a driver for the afternoon. Heading to the city?" Maya nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yeah. Just some stuff I need to take care of. I didn't want to bother your usual driver, since I know you have that meeting in the valley today, so I just called the agency for a temporary service." "You don't have to call an agency. I could have moved my meeting. We could have, I don't know, grabbed lunch on the way." Maya looked down at her watch, a gold piece he had bought her for her 18th birthday. "It's okay. I don't want to mess up your schedule. The car will be here at 1. "Right, of course," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. She gave him a small, polite nod, the kind you give a stranger who holds the door open for you, and headed toward the kitchen. Arthur stood in the hallway, the smell of her expensive perfume lingering in the air. That was it. That was their conversation for the day. It was efficient. It was respectful. And it was completely empty. He walked back into his study and sat in his leather chair, staring at the security monitors that showed the various angles of his estate. He looked at his own reflection in the darkened screen. He didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a lonely old man. He thought about the agency she had called. It was a high-end car service he frequently used for visiting executives. They wouldn't know him by sight. They only knew his assistants. A wild, desperate idea began to form in his mind. It was an idea that felt like something out of a movie, something a rational businessman would never do. But Arthur wasn't feeling rational. He was feeling forgotten. He picked up his desk phone and dialed his head of security, a man who had been with him for 20 years and was the only person Arthur truly trusted with his private thoughts. "I need a favor," Arthur said when the man picked up. "And I need you to make sure no one, especially Maya, finds out," he explained his plan. He wanted to intercept the agency driver. He wanted the car, the uniform, and a way to change his appearance enough that his own daughter wouldn't recognize him at a glance in the rearview mirror. He wanted to be the one behind the wheel. "With all due respect, why?" the security chief asked. Arthur looked at the old photo of him and Maya again. "Because I need to know who she is when I'm not the man signing the checks. I need to know if I've lost her for good, or if I'm just looking for her in the wrong places." As he hung up the phone, his heart hammered against his ribs. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or shipping routes. He was thinking about a 30-minute drive across the city. He was going to become a ghost in his own life, hoping that by disappearing, he might finally be seen. The transformation did not happen in the main house. Arthur knew the walls had ears and the servants had eyes. He slipped out through the service entrance and met his security chief, a silent man named Elias, in a small detached garage at the edge of the property. It was the kind of car that blended into traffic like a single drop of water in an ocean, none remarkable, slightly worn, and completely different from the armored black SUVs Maya was used to. On a wooden stool sat a kit that looked like it belonged on a film set. Arthur looked at the gray wig, the heavy-rimmed glasses, and the rough polyester driver's jacket. He felt a strange flutter in his chest, a mix of adrenaline and deep aching sadness. He was about to trick the person he loved most in the world, but he felt it was the only way to find the truth. "Are you sure about this, sir?" Elias asked, holding up a small bottle of spirit gum and a piece of latex that would slightly alter the shape of Arthur's nose. "If she catches you, there might be no coming back from the lie." Arthur looked at himself in a small, cracked mirror propped up against a toolbox. "The lie started a long time ago, Elias. The lie is that we're a family just because we share a roof. If I have to be a stranger to hear her voice, then that's what I'll do. For the next hour, Arthur sat still as his face was changed. He wasn't aiming for a monster. He was aiming for a nobody. A little bit of makeup to add age spots and sun damage, a slightly bushy sultan pepper mustache that hid the firm set of his jaw. The glasses were the final touch-thick lenses that made his sharp, calculating eyes look soft and a bit tired. When he put on the jacket, he felt his posture change. He slumped his shoulders. He stopped being a billionaire and became Silas, a man who had spent 40 years driving people more important than himself. He checked his watch. It was 12:45 p.m. Maya would be waiting at the front. Circle in 15 minutes. He drove the silver sedan out of the hidden gate and circled around to the main entrance of the estate. Seeing his own home from this perspective was jarring. The gates looked taller, more intimidating. The security guards, who usually snapped to attention for him, just waved the agency car through with a bored flick of the wrist. They didn't even look at his face. It was his first lesson of the day. When you are the help, you are invisible. He pulled up to the front steps. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He wiped them on his trousers and took a deep breath. Keep the voice low, he told himself. Don't look her directly in the eye for too long. Just be the driver. The heavy oak doors of the mansion opened. Maya stepped out, carrying a canvas tote bag that looked heavy. She wasn't wearing her usual jewelry. She looked toward the car, squinted at the silver sedan, and then checked her phone. Arthur felt his heart hammer against his ribs as she walked down the stone steps toward him. He stepped out of the car, keeping his head down. Service for Miss Maya? He asked. He kept his voice raspy, a low growl that hid his natural tone. Yes, she said, not even glancing at his face. She handed him the tote bag. Can you put this in the back? Carefully, please. Arthur took the bag. It was surprisingly heavy, filled with what felt like books or cans. He placed it in the trunk and then opened the rear door for her. She slipped inside, the scent of her lavender soap filling the small cabin of the car. It was a smell that usually reminded him of her childhood, but today it felt like a barrier. Where to, miss? He asked, settling into the driver's seat. 3rd and Harrison, she replied. The community center. It's in the downtown district. Arthur's eyebrows shot up behind his glasses. That wasn't the shopping district. That wasn't where her friends hung out. 3rd and Harrison was one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city, a place of cracked sidewalks, boarded-up windows, and people who had fallen through the cracks of the system. Sure, miss? He asked, pulling the car away from the mansion. I'm sure, she said quietly. She was staring out the window, watching the manicured hedges of the estate disappear, replaced by the tall, gray fences of the industrial park. For the first 10 minutes, there was silence. It was the same silence they had at the dinner table, but here, in the small space of the sedan, it felt different. Arthur watched her in the rearview mirror. She wasn't on her phone. She was just looking at the world passing by, her expression soft and a bit sad. Arthur decided to push. He had to know. You don't look like the usual crowd I pick up from that neighborhood. If you don't mind me saying, he said, trying to sound like a chatty, harmless old man. Maya shifted in her seat. What do you mean? Well, Arthur chuckled, a dry sound. I usually pick up executives in suits or people going to the airport. You look like you're heading to work, but you're coming from a palace. Maya didn't get angry. She didn't report him for being unprofessional. Instead, she let out a long, weary sigh. It's not my palace, she said. It's just a house my father bought. Sometimes I think he bought it just so he wouldn't have to hear me breathing in the next room. The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. He nearly swerved the car. He gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. I'm sure that's not true, miss. A man who builds a house like that. He must care about the people inside it. He cares about the idea of me, Maya said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the sparkle she used to have. He cares about Maya the student or Maya the daughter of a billionaire. He doesn't actually know Maya. I don't think he's looked at Maya in 5 years. Arthur swallowed hard. Maybe he's just busy. Men like that. They think providing is the same as loving. They get confused. Maya finally looked at him in the mirror. Her eyes met his disguised ones. For a second, Arthur was sure she saw through him. But she just saw a tired old man in a cheap jacket. "My father thinks money is a shield," she said. "He thinks if he gives me enough of it, nothing bad can ever happen to me. But the money is actually what's hurting us. It's like a wall. He stays on his side, I stay on mine, and we just send messages over the top. It's lonely, Silas. It's the loneliest thing in the world." Arthur had to turn his head away. The tears were threatening to dissolve the makeup around his eyes. He had spent his whole life building that wall, stone by stone, dollar by dollar, thinking he was protecting her. He never realized he was just building a prison for both of them. "So, what's at 3rd and Harrison?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What's worth leaving the palace for?" Maya looked back out the window as they entered the downtown area. "Something real," she whispered. "Something that doesn't have a price tag." As the car slowed down in front of a crumbling brick building with a sign that read "The Open Door," Arthur realized he was about to see a side of his daughter that he hadn't just missed, he had completely ignored. The car came to a stop in front of the community center, a building that looked like it had seen better days decades ago. The paint was peeling in long, jagged strips, and the front steps were chipped. To Arthur, this place looked like a liability. To the crowd gathered outside, it looked like a lifeline. He watched Maya reach for her heavy tote bag. He quickly hopped out of the driver's seat to help her, playing his role as the aging driver. "I can get that, miss," he said, his voice still low and raspy. He took the bag from her, and his back actually strained under the weight. "Goodness, what do you have in here?" "Lead weights." Maya gave him a small, genuine smile, the kind of smile Arthur hadn't seen directed at him in years. "Close. It's canned peaches and some heavy-duty socks. It's getting cold at night, and the people here really need them." Arthur walked her to the entrance. He felt a deep sense of unease. This neighborhood was the opposite of the sterile, guarded world he had built for her. There were men leaning against lampposts with wary eyes and families, huddled together with their entire lives packed into plastic bins. He felt a protective urge to grab her arm and pull her back into the safety of the sedan, but he forced himself to stay in character. "Do you want me to wait for you, miss?" he asked. "I'm not supposed to leave my passenger in a place like this." Maya looked at the building, then back at him. "I'll be here for 3 hours, Silas. You don't have to sit in the car that long. There's a little coffee shop around the corner. It's not fancy, but the lady who runs it is nice. Here." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a $10 bill, handing it to him. "Get yourself something to eat. My dad pays the agency, but I know they don't give you guys much of a break." Arthur stared at the bill in his hand. $10. It was a tiny amount of money to him, yet it felt heavier than a gold bar. She wasn't being condescending. She was looking at Silas as a human being with needs, something he realized he rarely did with his own staff.
"Thank you."
"Miss Maya," he said softly. "See you at 4, she said, and she disappeared through the heavy metal doors of the center. Arthur didn't go to the coffee shop. He waited 5 minutes, then pulled his hat lower and followed her inside. The air in the center smelled of floor wax, old steam radiators, and soup. It was a chaotic symphony of clanking pots, children playing in a corner, and the low hum of people talking. He stayed in the shadows near a bulletin board, covered in flyers for job training and health clinics. From there, he could see into the large kitchen and dining area. He saw Maya take off her light jacket, revealing a stained apron she must have kept at the center. She didn't look like a billionaire's daughter. She looked like she belonged there. He watched her move among the tables. She wasn't just handing out food. She was sitting down with people. He saw her talking to an elderly woman whose hands were gnarled with arthritis. Maya was carefully opening a container for her and listening with intense focus as the woman spoke. Later, he saw her playing a quick game of tag with 2 young kids while their mother ate in peace. Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. In his world, people talked to him because they wanted something: a contract, a favor, a donation. But here, You looking for someone, Pops? Or are you here for a bowl? Arthur jumped slightly, adjusting his glasses. Oh, I'm the driver for the young lady, Maya. The man's face softened instantly. Ah, Maya's driver. She's a godsend, that one. Been coming here every Saturday for a year. Never misses a day, even when it's pouring rain. Most of the wealthy kids who come here for school credits stay for an hour, take a photo for their social media, and leave. Not her. She stays until the floors are mopped. Arthur leaned against the wall, his heart racing. A year? She's been doing this for a year. Yeah, the man said, crossing his arms. At first we didn't know who she was. She just showed up and asked where the mops were. We found out later her dad is some big-shot tycoon. She asked us never to tell him. Said he wouldn't understand. The words stung Arthur more than any business loss ever could. He watched Maya across the room. She was laughing now, sharing a joke with a man who looked like he hadn't laughed in a long time. She looked happy. Truly, deeply happy. It was a radiance she never wore at the mansion. He realized then that he didn't know his daughter at all. He had been so busy building a legacy for her that he hadn't noticed she was building. One of her own, one made of kindness instead of concrete. Arthur spent the next 2 hours watching from different corners of the room. He saw her handle a difficult situation when a man became agitated, calming him down with a soft voice and a steady hand. He saw her cleaning up a spilled tray of juice without a second thought. He saw her being the person he had always hoped she would be, but he realized he had played no part in making her that way. He sat in the driver's seat, his mind spinning. He felt like an intruder who had accidentally stumbled into a sacred space. He checked his reflection in the mirror, making sure the mustache was still straight and the glasses were in place. When Maya walked out of the building, she looked exhausted. She got into the back of the car and let out a long breath. "Ready to go, miss?" Arthur asked, his voice thick with emotion he tried to hide. "Is Silas? Back to the house, please." She didn't call it home. As they drove away from the community center, the sun began to set, painting the city in shades of orange and purple. Arthur drove slowly, wanting to stretch the time. "Did you have a productive afternoon?" he asked. Maya leaned her head against the cool glass of the window.
"I did."
"It's the only part of my week where I feel like I'm actually alive, Silas. Do you ever feel like you're just playing a part? Like you're wearing a costume every day and you forgot who's underneath it?" Arthur looked at his own disguised face in the mirror. "Every single day, Miss Maya, more than you know." "My dad. He's a good man, I think," she continued, her voice trailing off. "But he's obsessed with the Sterling name. He thinks if he stops working, the world will forget we exist. I want to tell him that I don't care if the world forgets us, as long as he remembers me." Arthur's hands trembled on the wheel. He wanted to pull over right there. He wanted to rip off the wig and the glasses and pull her into a hug. He wanted to apologize for every dinner he missed and every conversation he cut short. But he knew he couldn't. Not yet. He needed to hear the rest. He needed to know if there was still a way back into her heart. "Why don't you tell him?" Arthur asked. "Because he's not listening," she whispered. "He hears me, but he doesn't listen. There's a difference." Arthur drove in silence for the rest of the trip, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He realized that the disguise wasn't just the makeup and the clothes. He had been wearing a disguise for years, the disguise of a successful man, and it had hidden the father she so desperately needed. The car glided through the suburban streets as they moved further, away from the city's grit and closer to the quiet, tree-lined avenues of the wealthy. The contrast was sharper than it had ever been for Arthur. Usually, he felt a sense of pride when he passed these gates. A sense of I made it. But today, looking through the eyes of Silas the driver, the tall hedges looked like fortress walls, and the iron gates looked like bars on a cage. In the back seat, Maya remained quiet for a long time. She was staring at her hands, which were slightly red from the industrial soap she used at the center. Arthur kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was focused entirely on the girl in the rearview mirror. One wrong word, and the fragile bridge she was building between her world and his Silas persona would snap. "You mentioned your father earlier, miss," Arthur said, his voice low and steady. He tried to sound like a man who had seen a lot of life, someone who wasn't judging, just curious. "You said he doesn't listen?" That's a hard thing to feel about a parent. Maya shifted her weight, pulling her knees up toward her chest, a habit she'd had since she was 5. One that Arthur hadn't seen her do in years. "It's not that he's a bad person. He's not. He's brilliant. He's brave. He took me in when I had nothing, you know? I was just a number in a system, a kid with a plastic bag full of clothes. He gave me a name. He gave me a future." Arthur's grip on the wheel tightened. He remembered that day at the orphanage so clearly. He remembered how small her hand felt in his. He had promised himself that day that she would never be cold, never be hungry, and never be afraid again. He thought he had kept that promise. But Maya continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Somewhere along the way, he started treating me like one of his companies. He manages me. He checks on my progress. He invests in my potential. But he doesn't just sit with me. Do you know we haven't had a meal together without him taking a phone call in 3 months?" He felt a sharp pang of guilt. He remembered those calls. He had thought they were important. He had thought he was showing her how a successful person works. "I have this memory," Maya said, her eyes looking far away. "It's from the first year I lived with him. We didn't have this big house yet. We lived in a much smaller place near the coast. One night, the power went out during a storm. I was terrified. I came running into his room, crying. He didn't tell me to go back to bed. He didn't call a servant to fix it. He just sat on the floor with me, lit a single candle, and we played I Spy for 3 hours until the lights came back on. He was just ... dad. Not Arthur Sterling, the CEO. Just my dad." She reached into her canvas tote bag and pulled out something small and brown. It was a tattered, one-eyed teddy bear. Arthur recognized it instantly. It was the toy she had been holding the day he met her. He had offered to buy her 1,000 new toys, bigger and better ones, but she had always refused to let go of this one. "I still keep this with me," she whispered, stroking the bear's matted fur. "I take it to the center every Saturday. It reminds me of who I am when I'm not the Sterling heiress, and it reminds me of the man he used to be. I think he'd be ashamed if he knew I still had it. He'd probably think it's clutter or sentimental nonsense. I don't think he'd be ashamed," Arthur said, his voice cracking. He had to cough to cover the emotion. "I think he'd be honored that you kept it." Oh, Maya shook her head. "He's forgotten that version of himself. He's so focused on building a mountain of money for me to stand on that he doesn't realize the air is too thin up there. I can't breathe in that house, Silas. Every time I try to tell him, he just offers to buy me something else. A new car. A trip to Europe. A bigger allowance. It's like he's trying to fill a hole in my heart with gold. But gold is cold. It doesn't hug you back." Arthur felt his world tilting. He had spent 20 years thinking he was the hero of her story. He thought he was the savior who had plucked her from poverty and given her the world. He never realized that in the process of giving her the world, he had taken away the only thing she actually valued, him. They were nearing the estate now. The familiar white stone columns were visible in the distance. Arthur felt a sense of panic. The ride was almost over. If he didn't do something now, she would walk back into that house. They would play their roles again, and the wall would remain standing until it eventually collapsed and crushed them both. "Miss Maya," Arthur said, his voice losing some of its Silas rasp. "What would you say to him? If you knew he was listening? If you knew he could hear you right now? Without the phones, without the business, without the money between you." Maya looked at the back of Arthur's head. She was quiet for a long time. The car slowed as they reached the final stretch of road before the gates. "I'd tell him that I'm proud of him," she said softly. "Not because of the buildings or the ships, I'd tell him I'm proud of the man who sat on the floor in the dark and played games with a scared little girl. I'd tell him that I don't need his money to be happy, but I do need his heart to be whole. And I'd tell him, I miss my friend. But he's not there anymore. He's buried under a pile of contracts and board meetings. I'm just waiting for the day I graduate so I can go off on my own and start a life where things actually matter. I think that's the only way I'll ever be free. Arthur's heart felt like it was breaking in slow motion. She was planning to leave. Not just the house, but him. She was waiting for the moment she could escape the palace he had built for her. He realized that if he didn't act, he was going to lose her forever, and it wouldn't be because of some tragedy or accident. It would be because he was too busy being a millionaire to be a father. He pulled the car to a stop, not at the front door, but on the side of the long driveway, hidden behind a row of ancient oak trees. "Why are we stopping?" Maya asked, a note of confusion in her voice. Arthur didn't answer. He couldn't speak yet. He just sat there, staring at his hands on the wheel. He looked at the fake age spots, the cheap jacket, and the wedding ring he had moved to his right hand to hide his identity. He felt the weight of every lie he had told himself over the last decade. Silas. "Is everything okay?" Maya leaned forward, her hand reaching out toward his shoulder. Arthur took a deep breath. It was time. The disguise had served its purpose. It had allowed him to hear the truth, and the truth had set his world on fire. Now, he had to decide if he was going to let it burn or use the heat to forge something new. The silence inside the car was thick. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the oak trees, but inside, the only sound was the ticking of the car's cooling engine. Maya was leaning forward now, her hand frozen just inches from Arthur's shoulder. She was worried, her young face etched with a kindness that Arthur now realized he had never truly earned. Yet she gave it freely to a man she thought was a stranger. Arthur felt the spirit gum pulling at his skin. He felt the weight of the wig and the suffocating fabric of the cheap driver's jacket. Most of all, he felt the weight of the words she had just spoken. "I miss my friend." Those 5 words were more powerful than any business merger he had ever signed. Slowly, Arthur reached up. He gripped the edge of the gray wig and pulled it back. It came away with a slight tearing sound. Then he reached for the glasses, setting them on the dashboard. He grabbed a small cloth from the glove box one Elias had provided, and wiped away the makeup and the fake mustache with a few rough strokes. He didn't turn around yet. He just stared at his own face in the rearview mirror. He looked like himself again, but he felt like a different person. He felt exposed. In the back seat, he heard a sharp, jagged intake of breath. Maya had recoiled, her back hitting the passenger door. "Dad?" The word was a whisper, a question, and an accusation all wrapped into one. Arthur turned around in the seat. He didn't look like a billionaire in that moment. His eyes were red and his face was streaked with the remnants of the disguise. "It's me, Maya." They worked together in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of the past few years. It was a comfortable one. Maya cracked the eggs, and Arthur toasted the bread. It was a small, domestic scene, but to Arthur, it felt like a miracle. He watched her movements, the way she hummed a song under her breath, the way she knew exactly which spice jar to reach for. He realized he had missed 1,000 small details about her life because he was too focused on the big picture. "So," Maya said, flipping an egg with practiced ease, "are you really coming today? You don't have a top-secret board meeting or a crisis in Singapore to manage?" Arthur pulled a kitchen chair out and sat down. "I told Elias to cancel everything for the next 48 hours. He thought I was having a midlife crisis. I told him I was actually having a midlife clarity. I'm coming, Maya. I've already got my old clothes ready. No wig this time, though. I think I'm done with the costumes." Maya sat across from him, placing a plate of eggs and toast in the center of the table. "Good. Because the people there, they don't care about Arthur Sterling. They care about who shows up. If you show up as yourself, that's all that matters." They drove to the city in Arthur's regular car this time, but he parked it 3 blocks away from the community center. He didn't want to show up in a vehicle that cost more than the building itself. As they walked toward the open door, Arthur felt a nervous flutter in his stomach. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals in glass boardrooms, but the idea of facing the people he had watched through a disguise yesterday made his palms sweat. When they entered, the man in the flannel shirt, the one who had spoken to Silas the day before, looked up from a clipboard. He looked at Maya, then his eyes traveled to Arthur. He squinted, his brain trying to connect the dots between the hunched-over driver and the tall, well-dressed man standing before him. "This is my father," Maya said, her voice full of pride. "He's here to help with the heavy lifting today." The man, whose name was Leo, walked over and wiped a hand on his jeans before holding it out. "Heard a lot about you, Mr. Sterling, though. I have to say, you look a lot younger without the mustache." Arthur shook his hand firmly. "I've been told I have a flair for the dramatic. Where do you need me, Leo?" Leo pointed toward the back of the room where a stack of heavy wooden crates sat by the delivery entrance. "We just got a shipment of winter coats and boots. They need to be sorted by size and moved to the distribution room upstairs. The elevator is broken, so it's all stairs today." For the next 4 hours, Arthur worked harder than he had in decades. His back ached, his forehead was slick with sweat, and his expensive shirt was ruined by dust and grease. He carried crates up 3 flights of stairs over and over again. He didn't complain. Every time he passed Maya, who was busy organizing the food pantry, she would give him a thumbs up or a quick smile. That was all the payment he needed. During the lunch rush, Arthur sat on a folding chair in the corner, eating a bowl of the same vegetable soup they were serving to the guests. An old man sat down next to him, his clothes tattered, but his eyes sharp. "You're new," the man said. "Blowing on his soup?" First day, Arthur admitted, wiping his brow with a paper napkin. "You look like you've never carried a box in your life," the man chuckled. "But you've got good form. Most people your age would have quit after the first flight of stairs." "I've a good reason to keep going," Arthur said, glancing over at Maya. The man followed his gaze. "That your girl? She's a spark plug, that one. She told me once that her father was a builder. I figured she meant houses. But looking at the two of you, I think she meant he was building a wall. It looks like you decided to tear it down instead." Arthur nodded slowly. "I'm trying. One brick at a time." "Good," the man said. "Tearing them down, ... That's the real work." As the afternoon wound down, the center grew quiet. The last of the guests had left and the volunteers were starting to clean up. Arthur grabbed a mop and a bucket of soapy water. He went to the far corner of the dining hall and began to scrub the linoleum. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't racing with numbers or logistics. He was just a man with a mop trying to make a floor clean. Maya walked over to him, her own work finished. She leaned on her mop and watched him for a second. "You missed a spot," she teased, pointing to a corner. Arthur leaned down and scrubbed the spot until it shone. "Better. Much better." She walked over and stood beside him. "You okay? You look like you're about to collapse." "I'm exhausted," Arthur admitted, standing up straight and feeling his spine pop. "But I feel ... lighter. Does that make sense?" Maya nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "It makes perfect sense. That's why I come here. When you're busy helping someone else, you don't have room to worry about yourself so much." They walked out of the center as the sun was setting, just like the day before. But this time, there were no secrets. There were no masks. As they walked back to the car, Arthur stopped at a small park bench. "Maya," he said softly, "I know I can't make up for 10 years in one weekend, and I know I'm going to stumble. I'm going to get a phone call I think I have to take, or I'm going to get stressed about a deadline. But I want you to promise me something, what? If you see the Millionaire coming back, if you see me starting to build that wall again, I want you to tell me. Don't wait a year. Don't wait for a car ride. Just tell me, Dad, the wall is going up, and I promise I'll stop. I'll sit on the floor. I'll play I Spy for as long as you need." Maya reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong, the grip of a young woman who knew exactly who she was. I promise. But only if you promise to keep that old teddy bear on your desk, not in a drawer. Right on the desk, next to your computer. So you never forget why we're doing this. Deal, Arthur said. They drove home in the quiet of the evening. When they reached the mansion, the gates opened, but they didn't look like prison bars anymore. They just looked like a way into a house where two people were learning to be a family again. Arthur went to his study that night. He didn't turn on the computer. He didn't look at the stock tickers. Instead, he took the tattered, one-eyed teddy bear and placed it right in the center of his mahogany desk. Then he picked up a pen and a piece of paper. He didn't write a contract. He wrote a note to his daughter, telling her how proud he was of the woman she had become, and how lucky he was that she had given a driver a second chance. The millionaire had spent his life trying to change the world. But in the end, it was the words of his daughter and a 30-minute drive in disguise that truly changed his world forever.